Welcome to the Spitzen-Körper Thelema. We are reading a fragment on honey from Paracelsus, the Swiss physician and alchemist who rewired Western medicine in the 16th century by insisting that disease and cure both emerged from nature itself, not from the speculative metaphysics of university physicians who had never touched a sick body. This is not a pharmacological treatise in any modern sense. It is a cosmology. Paracelsus is mapping the invisible architecture by which the moon, sun, and summer itself collaborate to transform earthly sweetness into the substance bees will harvest and humans will ingest as medicine. He belongs to a lineage that begins with Jabir ibn Hayyan and the Islamic alchemical tradition, passes through the medieval herbalists and natural magicians, and reaches forward into the vitalist medicine of the 18th and 19th centuries. What makes Paracelsus distinctive is his refusal to separate the chemical from the celestial, the practical from the sacred. Every substance carries within it the signature of the powers that made it. To understand honey is to understand how divinity speaks through matter. This fragment survives in the German he himself spoke, not the Latin of the learned, because he believed vernacular speech carried truths that scholarly language obscured. The text we are about to read comes from his medical writings on the preparation of remedies. It is incomplete, which is typical of Paracelsus's surviving corpus, fragments, annotations, notes dictated to students, manuscripts scattered across Europe and lost repeatedly. What survives is what mattered enough to copy, to preserve, to risk. This passage on honey became canonical in later esoteric medicine because it does something rare: it makes the invisible visible. It shows the student, the initiated listener, exactly how to see through the material surface of a substance into the celestial machinery that produced it. Honey becomes a lens through which the entire cosmos reveals its structure. We begin now with the first chapter. If we describe the essence and property of honey, we must first understand that the first materia is the sweetness of the earth, which settles around natural plants and is drawn to them by the force of the magnets proper to these plants. You must also hold fast to this, that in each and every prima materia everything is gathered that belongs to the various plants, as if many colors were poured together and only one were visible, but all are present, or as a seed, which is wood, which is leaf, which is branch, not present, but in time, when it grows out, everything appears. So you must also know that in the prima materia of natural things there is a compositum, a compound, from which then each plant draws out what belongs to it. Thus each plant draws to itself everything that, according to its kind, is needful to it. Now a twofold activity is at work, the one, namely, that the moon with its heavenly powers cooks and prepares this materia in the earth, and this preparation lasts from the beginning of the plants dying away to their sprouting again, as long as this does the moon digest this materia. And as soon as it has completed its preparation, spring draws near, and with it the plants spring forth and bloom and develop to their perfection. And from its own inborn nature the moon dries this materia out of the soil into the plants, like a rain that falls upon the earth and waters all the plants. Thus is the moon, which dries the prima materia out of the earth upward, like the clouds drive rain downward. In this way the plants strengthen themselves in their nature and property. Now follows something further, for although the moon has accomplished its decoction, it is not yet as it should be, but the sun accomplishes the other activity, which it begins in the morning as soon as it rises. And what the moon has driven up, the sun draws to itself and upward, like a magnet draws iron, and strengthens the stem or trunk with precisely the materia that the moon has prepared, so that stem or trunk in the ordained time come to the perfection for which they were made. Thus, daily the sun draws this liquor, and daily the moon too exercises its activity. You must know that rain is also of use here. It causes the materia of the moon to be softened and more subtly prepared, which otherwise would suffocate through dryness in the moon. According to how the mixture of liquor and rain unites thin or thick, or according to the nature of the soil, whether it be hard or subtle, or what nature the moon has in its working, according to this will the honey be thick or thin in the air. You must also understand that honey in its essence and its first materia is resina terrae, the resin of the earth, but this resin is not the same in all flowers or plants, but is partly gum, partly resin, partly sulfur, partly another form. Also that is resina terrae which grows in blossoms and twig tips, which is received in the form and shape of honey, but is not yet in its ultima materia through sun and moon, for the two planets cannot perfect anything to the end, but only in connection with the activity of the whole heaven, which ye shall understand as follows. When the plant raises itself in its stem, and the liquor in it is prepared through the moon, and the earthly rain has watered the face of the earth, and the liquor is drawn through the entire stem by the sun and distributed, then follows the third activity. This is the estivalous influence, the influence of summer, which is independent of sun and moon. This you can understand thus, as if a sealed glass, with something inside it, stood in a warm room, and what is in the glass prepared itself toward its goal. So stands the flower or plant on the earth in the heavenly room, and in it now begins the third preparation, thus the first through the moon, the second through the sun, and the third through the astrum astrobale, the star of summer. Just as in horse dung the homunculus or fermentum sanguis, grain blood, is digested. And through the said influenza, which works daily, honey is created daily more and more and is continually carried away by the bees. Thus, what is created daily, they carry away daily, and nature works again and again as much at this place. So understand that honey is at first nothing but an earthly spirit, but when the estivalous influenza comes to it, it makes a spiritus corporalis, that is, the spirit becomes bodily, the spirit, which under the influence of sun and moon has been an earthly spirit, becomes bodily and is called, when it has become so bodily, materia materiata, matter become matter, or spiritus corporalis, bodily spirit. This is what the bees take and carry to their place. Now this is still the first materia materiata, for honey and wax are together. But when these two are separated, as one also separates iron and steel from one another, then this is something bodily separated out of the materia materiata. Thus understand, just as the alchemists circulate the spiritus vini, the wine spirit, in the circulatorium or palacanum, so does the summer star cause the juices in natural plants to circulate. In this way honey flows from the earth into the materia materiata, thus into that which is entrusted to the bees. What is materia materiata is the subjectum of that being which undertakes to prepare this materia further, is thus a thing not yet completed, but which must be brought through another into the state of completion. So it is universally with natural things, each kind is subject to several others for perfection, beginning from the star to the living sentient animal, from that to the rational being, from this to the activity of death, which consumes all things and again makes from each what it was before. Nothing was it before, nothing is it after. Thus all things conclude themselves in nothing, for nothing were they also before. Since I have begun to write of honey, you shall know that nature in its way of working is so constituted that it always sets the grossest to the bottom and dries the pure and more subtle upward. From this it follows here that three kinds of honey are in one plant, lower, middle, and upper. The uppermost the bees seek, that lies in the flowers, in the blossom and in the locusts, there the bees seek it. In the middle and quite at the bottom they seek nothing, unless they do not find enough of the upper honey. Searching for honey, they then dig deeper in the direction of the soil, toward the root. That then yields a grosser kind of honey and wax. Their hunger is the preparation of the honey and so it is, they eat it is their food, is manna, is tereniabin, is losha, is tranasa, various kinds of sweet dew, honeydew, heavenly dew. This is their food, which they eat out of the flowers, and which they find in the blossoms and sprouts, just as one finds the yolk in the eggshell. Since they need this for their hunger, it follows further that they have amentoria, excretory openings, through which they cast out their egestions, their excretions. These are of two kinds, namely on the one hand it is wax, and on the other hand honey. It is usual with animals that they cast out their excrement and urine from the body. Because the bees have abundance of manna and tereniabin, they produce honey and wax. They chew these out of blossoms and sprouts and carry it, thus chewed out, into their dwelling. So the upper preparation occurs through the natural star, manna, losha, tranasa, from which honey and wax become. But not in that it so grows in blossoms and sprouts, but through the belly of the bees. The belly is the archeus, the life spirit, the active artist of nature, predestined by nature itself to transmute these things into honey and wax, and predestination must bring forth what lies in the active possibility of nature, and could not arise without the archeus. Otherwise are the excretions of man, otherwise those of cattle, otherwise those of bees. Yet as they are, so are they created for the use of another, as for example the excrement of cattle from meadows and pastures, likewise the excrement of bees for candles and medicines. For mana is their supreme food, mana is the marrow of the locusts. Tereniabin is their other food, tereniabin is the separated fat of mana, like the lard in a soup. Norsha is the perfect sweetness of the locusts down to the empty substance. Tranasa is the whole dew, born from the air, which descends especially, which is sought by the bees outside on the sprouts. It is like a rain that falls in one place and not in another. Between all these things there are distinctions which in physics are to be considered chiefly. For it is a difference whether something comes from the one thing or the other, and each cleaves to the nature of that from which it has the most. Thus the linden blossoms give another essence than the blossoms of the beech, another than the blossoms of the oak. All these are coarse, rustic foods for the bees. There are two kinds of bees, noble and ignoble, and also civic, those who live their lives in the wilderness. These are of course rustic kind and give a hard, strong, coarse honey and kernelly, defense of wax. For the peasants are the first and remain also the last. Then there are the noble bees, which nourish themselves on the stamens, that is, from roses, lilies and other beautiful ornamental flowers. These give the noblest honey, good for sweet mead and for subtle salves. There are also marriages between the rustic and the noble bees, thus a middle kind between the noble and the peasants, which also gather their honey, each kind according to its birth. In this way the coarse and the pure come together. This gives a tempered honey and a tempered wax. There are truly three kinds of bee, peasant, citizen, and noble. This distinction must be held fast by physicians, for accordingly the medicines are also distinguished, which are made from the three kinds of honey. And their different rank is known only by where they fly to seek their nourishment, and where they are seen by the other bees in gardens or wildernesses as domestic or wild. They nourish themselves from the field flowers and in gardens, in the tamed forests, but also in the wilderness and even in the desert. There are many kinds of peasants and also many kinds of nobles, with each their respective dwelling. It seems right to me that I explain to you, for better understanding of this my line of thought, something that scripture contains about the most holy man John the Baptist, how it is reported of him that he ate locusts and malsilvestra, wild honey. It is thus, the locusts he ate grew in the desert, where no men dwelt, that is, he dwelt in the desert. From this it follows that he also did not eat the usual worldly food, but he ate only the sprouts from the trees and drew them through the rustic honey which had been gathered by the wild rustic bees. Thus he nourished himself with rustic honey like a peasant. And this is interpreted by some, who are regarded as highly educated, so that locusts were supposed to be his food. These people are incapable of keeping silent about their own foolishness. In well-turned Latin they set forth their own foolishness and fantasy, like Jerome, Erasmus, and many of the new prophets who are famous in Latin. Among the blind they are one-eyed and not two-eyed, can do something and yet not enough. Now hear further of the office and behavior of the bees. It is evident how these same make their dwelling, wherein they do their work. Take yourself an example from it. As God the Almighty has given it to men through human sense and understanding to build and erect houses and dwellings for themselves, so has he also given it to irrational animals, so that according to their nature they can make and do make their own dwelling. We can see this in every animal species, that each one in its own way, according to its nature and property and its needs, makes its own shelter itself. Men have nothing for the inner man, but the outer has his shelter. And so foxes have their holes, birds their nests, so bees have their masonry and walls in which they dwell. These walls are called honeycomb. In this masonry they set up storerooms in which they accomplish their preparations. And just as man is gifted by God for all arts, and there are countless arts on earth, so is the animal also gifted by nature from God, so that animals under the influence of nature also understand many such arts. And the bees are so wonderful in their works that their artful being cannot be fathomed. The argument Paracelsus presents here is deceptively simple in structure but cosmologically dense in implication. Honey is not a passive substance extracted from flowers. It is a collaborative product of four celestial and terrestrial agents. Earth is prima materia, the moon as the digester and preparer, the sun as the drawer upward and concentrator, and summer itself, the established influence, as the final perfecter that transforms spirit into body, abstract materia into the concrete spiritus corporalis that the bees can then seize and further refine through their own alchemical labor in the belly. Each agent has a specific function within a hierarchy of transformation. Nothing in nature acts alone. Everything is subject to everything else. The bees themselves are not mere collectors but alchemists. Their archeus, their indwelling life spirit, is the instrument through which the work is completed. This is crucial. The bees are intelligent operators within a larger intelligence. They possess knowledge encoded in their nature, not learned through instruction. And their excretion, their waste product, becomes medicine and light for human use. What mutated here from the medieval tradition is the insistence on empirical observation yoked to cosmic vision. Paracelsus does not merely inherit the doctrine of signatures, he demands that the physician see the three grades of honey, peasant, civic, noble, distinguished not by abstract theory but by the flowers the bees visit, the soil they work, the terrain they inhabit. The quality of remedy flows from the quality of the materia, which flows from the celestial influence acting upon it. This seeded an entire tradition of pharmaceutical vitalism, the belief that potency is not reducible to chemical composition but inheres in the living totality of how a substance was made. It also grounded the later homeopathic and anthroposophical movements, which read Paracelsus as their ancestor in insisting that infinitesimal preparation could concentrate rather than dilute power. Whether or not that interpretation holds, Paracelsus's real innovation was methodological. He made it legitimate to ask not just what is the substance, but how did it become and what living intelligences participated in its becoming. For a medicine man, that question changes everything. Next, Jobber Ibn Hayyan, Kitab al-70. The Spitzen-Körper Thelema. If this archive serves you, support it on Patreon. Link in the description.